Just a second. So, yeah, welcome to the Psychology Perspectives interviews today with Frank James. And yeah, welcome, Frank.
Hey, thank you for having me, Maria. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Like, you're very well known as MBTI expert, also featuring a lot of psychology and philosophy topics, also talking about spirituality on your podcast. And first question would be like about psychology and philosophy. Were you always interested in it, and were some people inspiring you?
Yeah, well, first, I just heard that the landscapers are out there with their weed whacker, so sorry if you hear that in the background.
No.
But yeah, I've always had an interest in things like psychology and philosophy and the, just like things that are beyond what you think about every day, like the underpinnings of what's going on. Because with psychology, you start to get into more of what are the mechanisms behind the way I just accept as how I am, because our default is just go through life assuming, well, I have total free will and, everything is me. But then when you start to realize that there are things underneath it, these general, concepts at work, and just the dynamics of the human mind, I find fascinating. And with philosophy, it's kind of an extension of that, isn't it? Because it's just like the more general ideas of existence, because you can just accept existence as what it is, or thinking more about what goes into it, what does it mean, I really loved in college getting the introduction to philosophy, like the more going back to things like Aristotle and how, and before that, of course, just how things were broken down into explaining these concepts that you think naturally, like talking about something like what is anger, what is justice, etc. Just simple concepts that philosophy goes into to really examine what is it, So yeah, it's just a fascinating thing that is easy to get caught up in.
Great. And you were talking about also your grandpa doing hypnotherapy, hypnosis. That's amazing. Like, especially in the age. Like, did you get anything to know about it from him? And like, yeah.
A little bit, because he was at the tail end of his hypnotherapy career when I was a kid. But he still had like an office and stuff like that when I was really little, and then he would meet clients at his house. And he told us a few basics of it. But of course I was so young I didn't really understand. But I did get some books from him about hypnosis and even about like self-hypnosis. And it's just a fascinating thing to be able to tap into this way that the brain can operate. And a lot of people are like, oh, hypnosis really isn't real, but but a lot of people still use it, for real results. So there are, it's something I've always been like, anything to hack the brain, I find fascinating.
Sure. Yeah, like it's really the question, like how deep can hypnosis work? Like actually there are people like they get a stinge in the hand, and without hypnosis there would come a little bit blood out of it, but with hypnosis sometimes it's not. So yeah, it's very, very interesting. Yeah. And like 1 year in Spain, there was this transpersonal professor, and he was like, hey, are you believing after this class in the self and awareness and whatever concepts? And we were like, not sure. And then he asked us a few questions, but with a very, very interesting voice and stuff, and said like, yeah, it could be like that or like that. And you would ask yourself like that. And then he looked at us like 10 minutes, and we just realized, oh my God, he asked us a question. he put us in an involuntary trance. So yeah, it's yeah, very
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone I think has experienced hypnosis to a degree. Like even if you, to, it's kind of a cheap form of hypnosis, but if you ever get like fully drawn into a movie or something like that, you're kind
yeah,
of in a trance. Like you forget about where you are and you're just fully accepting the reality that is being given to you,
sure.
um, by the movie. So it's a good idea to be aware of that and then use it to your advantage if you can.
Sure, right? Or like, yeah, yeah, I think for some things it can be very helpful. Sure, yeah. And yeah, one very interesting moment I when discovering your videos recently again was like, what happens really in the live streams? It's so I'm so curious. People just drop a line, one question. What happens in this moment, like in this few seconds? Like, what would you say is your internal process? Like, can you describe it?
So you mean like in the live streams, when I get a question, like how yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
tough. Like to bring viewers up to speed, it's like, I'll do a live stream on YouTube and have 5, 6, 700 people watching, and they can ask me random questions about whatever. Usually it's about typology, about Myers-Briggs. And in the moment, sometimes the questions can be so like there's not really much of an answer to it, but a lot of times these are questions that are paid with a super chat, so you feel like you need to expand it a little bit. They'll ask questions about the compatibility between two types, and in reality, there's not, anything could happen. So one of the underlying things with Myers-Briggs and the way that the types work is with cognitive functions, which is, what it all is based off of, what Carl Jung came up with his work Psychological Types. And if you can go back to that, if you can go to the inner workings of a type with the functions, it becomes a little easier to kind of draw out these kind of answers
Mhm.
when people ask kind of either questions that are so broad, it's like, how do I even do anything, or questions that are so specific where it's not enough information to
Mhm.
to say anything meaningful. And
Mhm.
from the cognitive functions, for example, if you're talking about someone who has extroverted feeling as their preferred decision-making function, you could say things like, you're probably the kind of person who thinks of other people first when you're making
Mhm.
decisions, and it's hard for you to kind of assert boundaries, and you want to make sure other people are happy. And it's difficult sometimes to say stuff that isn't just general, could apply to anybody. So that's, that it is a little bit of a, um, I feel like I'm jumping through hoops a little bit to give a meaningful answer that isn't just totally bland and broad, that has some
Mhm.
specificity to it. And but sometimes when I get a question, I'm like, oh no, how am I going to answer this? But once I get started, I'm able to navigate it in a way where people seem to like the answer. So
All right.
yeah,
Yeah, quite interesting. Yeah, because like it seems like when somebody asks a question, like you are a few seconds, like somewhere,
yeah,
and so. But what you're saying is like you're thinking, okay, what concepts do I know? Like, what does the other one wants to hear? It
yeah.
makes the other one feel happy, and but it also seems like would you also like, is it also an emotional process for you, or like also remembering things, or is it more like also a lot of taking these two factors so much into comparison, like what does the other one mean, like what does the other one person wants, and
Yeah.
then the concept.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of what comes into it is also what am I going to be able to adequately explain in a short amount of time? Because I have to
Yeah,
assume my audience doesn't know that much.
yeah, yeah.
So, and sometimes I catch myself being like, oh, I'm assuming that they know what these things mean, but they don't. So, that's part of it, part of why I have to like stop and think. And also, I don't want to just start talking right away and perhaps start down a path where I'm like, well, wait a second, because sometimes I'll do that where I start down a path and I realize, well, if I had more information, I could maybe say the opposite, you know?
Sure.
Yeah, and I also, I try to be responsible because you don't want to just give out advice willy-nilly,
Mm,
and especially because sometimes heavy questions are asked where it
mm,
seems like people could be dealing with, mental health issues, and I don't want to make it seem like typology is an answer for those
yes.
things because it's not. So,
Mm,
um, so yeah, so that's why I pause before I answer because sometimes I have to like really think through, or even just think through. I got to make sure the advice I give couldn't end up with this person, doing something uh, that would make them worse off than if they didn't do it.
sure, sure,
You
sure.
know?
Yeah, so yeah, I think it's quite interesting. I mean, like it's a quick time pressure running through, and you're kind of keeping a balance between also humor, entertaining, and also trying to give some impulses. And I think you draw the line good again
Oh,
and
well,
again.
thank you.
Also, so it's like yeah. Okay, yeah, and you are describing yourself like this. There's this different cognitive functions from Carl Jung and MBTI, and yeah, studies say it's not 100% scientific. Why? They say it's not 100% selective, like, but yeah, it can be also questionable, the studies sometimes. And yeah, but you're describing yourself, and this exists a lot, like this different functions, as somebody who's very concerned with the other ones around you, right? Like, so what would you describe the first minutes you meet somebody? How do you perceive the other person? Like, what happens there?
Yeah. So do you mean like in terms of am I trying to type them right away? Are you?
Yeah, not necessarily, but maybe. But
Yeah, well, because that's the thing is it's like,
yeah,
yeah, this typology isn't scientific there, but
yeah,
there are clearly things that are
sure,
patterns that seem to be there.
yeah,
And I think it's really just a matter of figuring out what terminology is most accurate and like how scalable uh, are the patterns we see. So when I meet someone new, like once you get into Myers-Briggs or any typing system, Enneagram, whatever, you can't help but start to think about people in those terms and try to see like what pattern am I seeing with them. Yeah, and a lot of times when I meet someone new, I kind of am maybe not, not typing them completely, but kind of like trying to figure out what do I see on the surface from them in terms of what their type is, even if it's something as general as introvert, extrovert, and just that can be helpful because, there's a camp of people who will say you shouldn't put labels on people, but I think using labels to describe patterns can help you, you know, meet people where they are a bit better. And
sure,
so, yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah, so definitely when I'm meeting people, it's kind of like, I mean, we all do it. Like even if you don't know
sure,
typology, when you meet someone, you're filing them. Everyone has a typology system in their mind, you
sure,
know?
yeah, yeah,
And
sure,
right, you meet someone and you're like, this reminds me of that guy I knew in high school. They must be the same, something like
sure,
that.
sure, sure,
So,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, so
yeah.
I think it's good to, if you open yourself up to some kind of system of typology, it's good because then you are, holding yourself to somewhat more specific definitions than you might otherwise do. Yeah.
Sure. And you figured out also some kind of virtuous way to get into this different energies, like the 16 personalities,
Yeah.
and like to really, and I think that's amazing, like to really put yourself into 16 different shoes, differentiate them, and really
Yeah.
step into their energies. How would you describe that? How are you doing that?
Yeah, so on YouTube with my 16 personalities comedy sketches, I do, I'll have a theme, go through each type, what they would do in that situation. And a lot of times it's more about the comedy than, the accuracy
Sure.
of the type. But it turns into sort of in a drama in a dramatic way. There's 16 characters,
Mm.
so it becomes like uh, just finding different motivations for each character, and you know because every type has different motivations, what they're going for, what they are frightened by, things that will
Mm.
annoy them, situations
Mm.
where they'll thrive or not thrive. And I think the funny thing about having all 16 is to be able to contrast them and to say, oh, this
Mm.
type is going to react really badly to this, but this type's going to react really well. And it's fun to be able to think about, especially the types that would not react the way I would, because
Mm.
sometimes it can feel very freeing to be like, ooh, this is what it's like to to act this way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I mean, just from an acting standpoint, it's even though, I'm not a great actor and all they're all sort of the same, but still it's fun to be able to just like play around and do different stuff with the different types.
Sure, yeah. So what would you see like in any kind of relations, like friends, family relationships? I would bring it down to three factors often, like if there's a conflict or if they go on well quite easily. Like as you mentioned, like it's so much about like the needs, right? A conflict is there when a need is a little bit different than the other need, so it's
Yeah,
99% of the cases.
yeah.
So and then an interesting situation. So and yeah, and also the anger and anxiety. And yeah, would you see some clustering like from the factors or whatever? Like what could be different needs or anxieties or anger, and
Oh
which
yeah.
which which types could really annoy each other quite easily.
Yeah, well, so I think the most general way
Yeah,
to group them, in my opinion, well,
yeah.
you can do it in many ways, but if
Yeah.
you look at the first and last letter of the type, so if you get uh, IJs and EPs together, they're sort of the opposite in what they're going for, because the IJs want to be very uh, planned out. They kind of want to know what's going on, what to anticipate. They want to keep things
Mm-mm.
uh, organized, whereas the EP types, they want to kind of just do it as it comes, be spontaneous. They don't want to limit things down, and so that could be a source of conflict. With the IPs, they're always wanting to kind of go with their own inner compass, to do their
Mm-mm.
own thing, which could clash with, or perhaps be
Yeah.
totally complementary with, an EJ type who is always looking out for everyone else first and kind of martyrs themselves.
Mm.
So, yeah, I mean, that can be a lot of times where you find it is when it seems like a communication breakdown sometimes, where it's like because one person needs a schedule, another person doesn't care about a schedule, one person wants to make sure everyone's voice is heard before making a decision, but another person just wants to do their own thing and doesn't care. And a lot of times we just assume, oh, that other person is uh, being rude or they're being weird, but it's really just a different type. Like they just do things a different way because that's how they're wired.
Yes, sure. Yeah, it's just different ways of perceiving and
Right. Yeah.
and feeling. Okay, so you're saying like this. So introverted, extroverted is the I and the E's, and
Yeah.
the perception and the judging type. And you would say like this judging function would be more prone to plan out things, and the perceiving function would be more like flow orientated.
Yeah, generally, because I
Okay.
mean, things can change. So, like, the IJs definitely are going to be more rigid with that, but EJs, they can do both. They can be spontaneous, but they also need a plan sometimes. They're a little bit more balanced just with the way that their type is. Whereas the EPs are going to be very spontaneous. The IPs can be balanced just like the EJs with that. So, yes, generally you are right, but it's a little different for each quadrant.
All right, okay. Yeah, and you were telling like some types like really would go more for the inner campus, the inner values, and so on. There's something called acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's really beautiful. Like you have different areas and covering inner values, emotions, and awareness, and so on. And and that's a question I ask myself sometimes. Like, I think it's very helpful for everybody, but could there be some types more freaked out if you talk about inner values and emotions and how to align with them?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. If you get the EJ types, if you got like an ENTJ and tried to have them do ACT, they would not like it probably. They'd probably freak out a bit. But
why why do you, I know what to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's because, their inferior function, which is the one that gives them the most trouble, is going to be the introverted decision-making function. So if you ask someone who has that issue, what are your values? They're going to be like, I don't want to talk about that. Whereas if you talk to, an IP who's the opposite, they'll be right on it. They'll know exactly what to say. So, yeah. And it is, it's interesting how you bring that up because, yeah, that would be a useful thing for therapists to know going into that, how different treatments could affect different types.
Yeah, I just found out, like, generally people like to work with that, but also, with some others that's more resistance also, and they prefer at the beginning more cognitive approach and and an ENTJ, like how to spot an ENTJ, like what would be characteristics? So it's extroverted, then
so the ENTJ would be an extroverted, intuitive thinking type who is a judger. So, I mean, the biggest thing is once you get into the cognitive functions, ENTJ is going to be an extroverted thinking type. That's their dominant function, and that is the dominant function typically is the thing that will be most apparent, especially in an EJ or an IP. But EJs can be the easiest ones to type because they're extroverted. Extroverts just say more things. So you have more evidence to support what type you think they are. But the EJs are kind of the people who are always going around asking everyone a bunch of questions, and you'll find that the questions are often just like, okay, what do we need to do to get this to work? Like, what is going to work for you? How do we do the thing that makes sense and is efficient? And it's not like the stereotype of maybe the scientist who will go off by themselves to figure it out. The ENTJ is asking everyone and is like, they need to be tapping everyone on the shoulder. And sometimes the ENTJs can be a little bit more aggressive and, because they just want the information. They want to get it out of you. So so and that's an example of how you'd start to spot one of those in the wild.
All right, in the wild. And I would you say maybe there's a motive also, to do things effective and like more. What I think it's very also interesting about your channel, like really would acknowledge, like you show up like very brave, open, sharing a lot of insights, and you also show some vulnerability, also talking about a lot of topics, also existential topics. And the question would be like, where did you take the braveness from to show up and to show yourself? And
Well, I did that a lot more when my channel was smaller, and it was easier when my channel was smaller because there wasn't many people watching. So,
Yes,
but
right.
even then, it's like when 1,000 people are going to see your video, that's still a lot of people. So, I like sometimes I think about it in terms of like an actual venue to be in a theater that seats 1,000 people. That would seem overwhelming if you did something in person.
Sure, sure.
And I think it's just the weird thing about YouTube is the audience oftentimes is just a number. It doesn't feel the same as if you saw them in person. So it was easier to do those kind of videos. And plus, I was in a point in life where I was really struggling with a lot of stuff and working it out, and YouTube was a big outlet for me. And I also wasn't in therapy at the time, so that was part
Mm,
of it. And now I do it less. I am less open because, well, a couple reasons. I mean, the audience is bigger. Plus, I know it appeals to a smaller audience anyway, and I don't want to. I just worry it's confusing if I do a comedy video one day and something else.
no, sure. Mm,
And then the other thing is, a lot of times I just don't feel. It's just like I don't feel like it's something that I want or need to talk about as much. So, but it is something that I have wanted to figure out a way to do again, to get back into, to be a bit more open on the channel. But it's really hard when your profile is higher because you start
sure.
you start to
Yeah,
attract more random people who will just take
sure.
pot shots at you in the
Sure,
comment
sure.
section.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think originally when I was making those videos, I felt like there's no reason not to say any of this. It didn't really feel brave to me because people said, "Oh, you're being brave," and I'm like, I don't know that I'm being that brave. I think
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't necessarily always do things without or say things, make a video without thinking about it a lot first. So I kind of felt
Mm-hmm.
like I had gotten it straight and knew like where I could go and where I could not go
All
before I started
right.
shooting the video. So um, yeah, that would be I think where I got the bravery. It was going into it with a plan.
All right. Yeah, but it's interesting. I mean, like you're also talking about like some things which people do maybe naturally are not that obvious to the people also sometimes. And I think it's quite good for a lot of people to have something relatable also. Like and yeah, and there's also this author Irving Yalom, and he's writing about existential loneliness. So that a lot of people pushing this away, right? Thoughts of death or like existential questions, and but it's there, and I think that's very remarkable that you seem to talk about it,
Yeah.
and you went through it and you shared it, and you found your ways to let it be there, right? And to go through it, and so yeah, I think that's quite inspiring for a lot of people and quite good also. So
Well,
yeah.
thank you. Yeah. It can also be tough. It can kind of turn you off of making certain videos because YouTube commenters sometimes don't, or it's like the audience sometimes I worry doesn't get exactly what I was going for and takes it to be something else. And it's
Mm,
like,
yeah, yeah.
it's like I want to make sure that I'm clear and that, when I make a comedy video, it's clear, laugh, you know. But when it's more existential, sometimes people are like, "Oh man, you must be depressed or something," or "Man, this is, way to bring us all down." And it's like these are just things to think about. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a tough, I think, like ground also YouTube, right? Yeah, yeah, because like anyone can watch, anyone can comment, and they
yeah,
don't need to go in direct contact. And it's sometimes vulnerable topics, but
yeah.
yeah, but great. I mean that you were sharing, and yeah, and these things everyone is experiencing. So that's quite, yeah, quite remarkable, I would
Well, I
say.
appreciate that.
Yeah. And yeah, what would you say? Like, could you do some, what would be your ideas just to make the bridge to the other topics? And some short idea what is typing about, like some examples. Like, do you know Britt and Jermaine from Flight of the Conchords?
Yeah.
What types could they be?
Oh, well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to watch a bit more. They definitely seem like they could be more of the perceiving types, you know. Brit
Mhm.
maybe is a EP or IP. I can see Jermaine being maybe an EJ, but I've seen mostly the songs. So, but a lot of it, a lot of people who are into that kind of comedy and especially stuff that's kind of parodies, making fun of things, a lot of times can be towards the EP types, like cluster around that, because it's all about just grabbing onto something, having fun with it, moving on, going to something else. So yeah, that's an interesting one. On my channel, I want to do some of that, like making videos where it's like looking at a celebrity or something like that and trying to type them and see, use people as examples, because I think that's easier to learn what a type is like when you can think about a real person, you know?
Sure, it makes it more, yeah, imaginative and sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, like then, yeah, and also like your channel was quite broad, also with the scan the live stream topics.
Yeah.
And yeah, what would you ask if you could meet Remedios Varro? Like, where would you meet her, and what would you ask her?
Oh yeah, my favorite painter, the surrealist,
Yeah.
Remedios Varro. Oh man, I don't know. Like, in some ways, I don't know if I would ask her anything about her paintings, but maybe just like, what do you do to get in the mindset to come up with that stuff? Because
Mm,
what I love about her paintings is that they always have a story in them. You look at it and you just, like, even if the story isn't clear, like, you just feel like that's part of a story. There's action, there's an implication of a before and after, and that is part of some longer arc.
mm,
And that's it. Just what I love about them is they just spark your imagination. You just start to think about what does it mean, and they're very symbolic as well. Um,
mm.
So yeah, I would probably just say I'd probably ask her about the creative process. Where do they come from? Like, what do you do to get in that mindset? But even then, I might be afraid to ask, because sometimes when you get the answers from the artist, it's not as good as the answers you came up with yourself. You know, yeah, that's like if you read about a song you like and what the meaning of the song is, and they tell you, oh, it's about my dog or whatever, and you thought it was this big philosophical thing, and it's like it can be disappointing.
It's about an actual dog, maybe, or a dog in
Yeah,
general.
yeah. It's like
Oh.
I thought it was about something bigger. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I probably just talk about the process. Yeah.
Yeah. What would be your process for creativity and coming up with ideas?
Yeah, I think what's tough is pushing yourself to just s- come up with an idea that you feel good to move on with, because I get caught up in kind of a perfectionistic thing where I want to have the best idea always and do the best job I can at it. And it's difficult to just come up with it when you're worried about it not being as good as if you just thought a little bit more and came up with a better idea. Because there are
Mm.
times where I just have a flash where I know this is a great idea and I can execute it perfectly, and I do it. And I think that holds me back other times when I'm just kind of doing the work,
Mm.
and it just feels like, oh man, I wish I could just get that flash again. But so much of creating is just work and just the craft and just doing it, putting something down on paper, filming something and then just working with it until it gets where it should be. Because a lot of times in the beginning, I don't feel very good about a video I've shot or maybe even the script as I go into it. And or at least parts of the script. Like there'll be one joke where I'm like, I don't know if I'm delivering this right. I'm not sure if it's funny enough. But then when I start to edit it, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can work with this. This is good. So you have to just kind of trust yourself that you are good enough. And of course, I work with a writing partner. I have to trust that she knows what she's doing and kind of just let go and let each person do their job, even if that person is me at a different point in time, So, yeah.
Yeah, great. And great that you're working there together and and that it clicks there so much. And I think, it's that's often a typical thing for artists, right? That there's so much like about then also maybe questioning it, but working through it. But making it also changing that. And maybe coming later back to some other thing you said, but what is the self for you? Like, what would you say? And connection to oneself.
What is the self? Wow. I mean, I think for a while I got into a lot of the kind of more new age teachers talk, people like Eckhart Tolle and whatever. Adyashanti is another one that I like, who, describe the self kind of as just nothing. It's the nothingness within you, and that everything else around it are, kind of parts of you, but not the essence of you. But then there are other people who are like, no, everything that's going on in your body, even the things you don't control, that's all you. And then other people take it to the other. I mean, even those teachers like Adyashanti are like, you are everything. Like everything is connected to you. In the same way that you can't control your heartbeat, you can't control like the way the earth is. I heard a thing from Alan Watts, who is another teacher I like a lot. I was just listening the other day to one of his lectures, and he was saying, like, if there was someone from another, universe, a scientist from another universe who came to study you, that alien scientist would probably come to the conclusion that you are like the natural growth out of this universe. Like you are part of this universe. Like it's not separate. And I think that can be a trap to fall in when thinking of the self as being like this totally separate entity from everything else. While there is like a what is the word I'm looking for? There is your consciousness is separate from other people's, while you are in this body, but it's important to also realize that the self, yourself, is connected with everything else in a way. We all come from the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I think connecting with the self is just learning to accept all of that, accept all the parts of you that are you, and to accept, that you are part of this greater system, and that you're not like thrown onto Earth, from somewhere else. It's like you came out of it. And but then the other side of that is learning what is not you, because getting more into mental health topics, there are times where you think that if you have a disorder or something, that is you, that's part of you, that's just how I work. And in a sense, yes, it is part of you because it's part of your experience, but it's not really you in the sense of this is not how things should be functioning. So I think it is important to like have acceptance of everything that is part of your inner world, your experience, but then also to be able to realize I don't need to suffer needlessly because of thoughts I'm having, because of, the way that my mood is, etc., that there are things that you can get treatment for so that you can be more of your true self, to get more back to what the baseline would be, I guess, of your psychology.
All right. All right. So you would say like kind of a dualism, and also you would like go for this accepting all parts which are there, like observing, knowing all parts and accepting them, and you would see it more dualistic. So it's like there is ends to the self, and but also some interconnectedness. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the most well thought out philosophy at this point, but
No, that's good. Yeah, and also interesting is maybe sometimes also how much people are in contact with their self, and as you mentioned it, like really feeling what is yourself, what is your feeling, what's the feelings around. And you were making a video, check this all out, about some introvert loop or discussion, and I think like sometimes there can be also an empath loop. So one is like like you were describing it also in another video, like one is like what are you feeling, the other one is what are you feeling. And what would you recommend people, like when they are like couples or other people? Like I realized this with some couples, like it's everything there, like the emotions, the humor, and so on. And there's a psychologist, he's called David Schnarch, he's from the US, and he describes this as a melting conflict. So both have a high wish for harmony, maybe anger, conflict avoidance, and both would be like very empathetic with the other, but then sometimes not realizing the border, and being able to take some time off, like to have another opinion, to feel some tension and let it be there. What would you recommend in empath loops?
So that would be tough. So you mean like where both people in a relationship are empaths, where they kind of are feeding off of each other, where it becomes, they kind of loop into each other, because then they have a hard time cutting it off, a hard time severing that and being like, let's make a decision. Let me stand up for my side of things. That's tough. That is, I think someone who identifies as being an empath, that's the big thing they need to work on is boundaries, especially with emotions, and realizing that they don't need to take responsibility for other people's emotions. I think responsibility is a good way of thinking about it. Like, what do I need to be responsible for? And it is good to take some, when you are in a relationship, to take responsibility for making sure you are treating the other person, as they should be treated, treating them well, taking care of them. But you first and foremost have to have a responsibility to yourself, making sure that, you are expressing yourself, taking responsibility for your emotions before you can take on someone else's. So I think that would be the thing to work on, is like just being able to say no, being able to deal with someone else being upset. I feel like in that kind of loop, it might be an issue where if one person tries to assert a boundary and say no to something or express a dissenting viewpoint, the other person may get upset, and then the first person gets upset also, and then they just like, okay, let's go back to what we were doing before and be happy. I think it's tough. Like, I don't like it when people are upset. I react very badly to it. So that's something I have to work on, is being okay with other people not being happy, and that would be my advice, because it's the advice I'm trying to give myself. So
Great, great. Okay, yeah, another thing you were mentioning before, and yeah, a lot of artists have this, like creating some work, but then varying a lot. Is it good enough? And the question is can there be ever a definition of good enough? And also a key thing for so many people, like nearly everyone has some kind of inner critics
yeah.
who they are suffering from, and sometimes this feeling not good enough, and people deal different with it. Like, what would you recommend artists or other people if they're worried about their work, or like, or also some ambitious people, right, who have difficulties putting brakes on and taking some time off and for themselves?
Yeah. Well, with artists, it's tough because so there's a lot of questions in there. So the definition of good enough, I think, has to do more with the impact that it can have. I think the audience is equally important in any work of art. And so it's not to say that the audience now always knows best. Like, I'm sure there are great works of art that no one's ever heard of just because they didn't get out there. I'm sure a lot of it just has to do with marketing ability, and a little bit of luck. But I think if a work impacts people in the way you intend, or maybe even in the way you don't intend, because what I've seen a lot of times is people find their own interpretations of something you've created that means more to them than maybe what you had intended, which goes back to the thing of I don't want to know necessarily what a song means to the writer. I think that's one of the things about art that's great, is that anyone can come to it and kind of see a reflection of themselves. I think one of the best practical things that an artist can do is just have a deadline and just force it out, and don't allow yourself to take too long. But it's tough depending on what discipline are you in, because YouTube, I have to make 3 videos a week. If I don't think it's very good, I'm just gonna make it as good as I can and put it out, because I know I have another video. It doesn't matter. The stakes aren't that high. But if you're like a novelist and you've spent years writing a book, you want to make sure it's good enough, because it's going to take you years longer to write another book. But you've still got to get to a point where you're just like, I can only do it the best I can this day, and if I wait till tomorrow, I'll be a little bit better and I can make it a little bit better. But still, 10 years from now, I'm going to look back on this and be like, I could do it much better now. But you still have to keep putting stuff out. You can't just like wait until you're on your deathbed and say, this is the best I can do. So, yeah, I think deadlines are great, because you just stop caring because you need to get it out. You need to finish it by a certain date, or, I will consider it a failure. And it's, you bring up like people who are very ambitious and they can't take a break. That's tough with artists, because it doesn't feel like work a lot of times, especially if I've found like I can just work all day on stuff, on videos, because it doesn't feel like work. It just feels like something I'm trying to get done. I'm trying to perfect it. And it can help to just set boundaries, set deadlines, be like, I'm not going to work on it after this time, or I'm going to take this day off, or I'll work like crazy for this period, but then I'll take a week off, whatever your whatever your discipline is. So it takes the magic out of it. I think that's the thing, is that artists always want to be like, oh man, I'm creating, this is awesome, this is like this spiritual experience. And it feels like you're devaluing it when you just say, I got to get it done. I got to get it out there. I don't care. It's just whatever. But that's what you have to do. Like, you have to switch, like, you get the inspiration at the beginning, but switch it off and just go into craft. Like, I'm going into the craftsman part of it. And, I have to, a craftsman isn't going to say, they're building a table. They're not going to say, I have to work on this table, perfectly forever. It's like, no, I just have to make the table and sell it. So
Sure. Yeah.
I have to make the table so I can use it.
Great. So you would say like, keep the magic, allow yourself to lose track of time and space, but now and then put some breaks and deadlines.
Yeah, you need to put on your
Okay.
your manager cap at some point, your
Yeah.
managing director cap, and kick the artist in the butt a little bit and get the artist to finish on at a certain time. I mean, of course, there are if you're at the upper echelons, you're probably not listening to me, but if you are like Pulitzer Prize winning novelist, maybe you spend longer on it. But I think a lot of people are on the opposite end where they just spend so much time perfecting these little things that what they really need to do is just get the work out there, do more work.
Yeah, but great. Like also like a long time ago, like people thought like if you work too much, it's too much stress. But
Yeah.
actually now studies show if people have joy from it and they are so much in the flow, also the body reacts like if you would experience joy all the time, and it's actually the blood vessels get thicker, and
Oh,
so
wow.
it's great to allow
Yeah.
this flow and to really enjoy it. But yeah, in the meta picture, sometimes might be good, to take some pauses and breaks, or to
Yeah.
just check in and see, is it joy at the moment or is it perfectionist? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so then one last MBTI question, and then like 2, 3 last ones.
Sure. Yeah.
Great. Would there be some typing differences, like, or maybe, a key thing between relations also is the need for closeness or distance, like intensity or also space in between. Would you say, could there be some preferences from the MBTI where there is differences shown?
Yeah, it could be that types who have extroverted feeling tend to maybe be more likely to want to be close. It could be, just generally extroverts want to be close more. But I don't know that it's necessarily something if you like if you really looked at it at scale, if it would be something where you would necessarily see a pattern. And it's hard. That's the thing that I think needs the research that needs to be done with typology to make it a bit more legitimate is to see what is affected by type and what isn't, because you have a lot of people who try to explain everything in life with the type, and I think you might see some clustering. You might see the thinking types maybe don't need as much closeness, but then you might find other thinking types who are very close. And I mean that is an interesting thing to look into. But I think my inclination is that it would really vary and have maybe more to do with maybe just upbringing, like how much was someone brought up to, need closeness or need, because it's different, like introvert, extrovert. If you're talking about an intimate relationship or even a close friendship, how much, time people want together. Even someone who's very introverted might want to be very close with one person. So, yeah.
Right. Okay. So, and then very last question to MBTI.
Yeah.
What is MBTI for you? What does it explain for you, and what not? Like, where is for you?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out more. I think I'm trying to simplify it more and more because it's hard to get out of the mindset of thinking everything could be explained by it. And I think that's like a dangerous road to go down. So, for me right now, it really just kind of can help explain the process of how people communicate and how they make decisions, because I wouldn't even say why they do those things. Like, why does someone make a decision? Could be any number of reasons, but it's like, what was the process by which they made the decision? What did they feel responsible to do? Was it to go with the logic or was it to go with the emotions? When they're communicating, and you hear what they have noticed, what they have, perceived, you'll see how different things are valued, how some people will feel more responsible toward the facts and some people more responsible toward the meanings of it. And so I'm always trying to remind myself, keep it simple. Like, just look at the basics of the process, and it's preference also, not all one thing or the other, because everyone can do thinking and feeling, everyone can do intuition and sensing, but it's a preference, and you have to, like, I think typing is a lot more difficult than it might seem, because people have a lot of anecdotes and stereotypes, and you really got to listen to what someone's saying to see what their preferences are.
All right, okay. And one question landing from 2 other podcasts, but it would be also an acceptance and commitment therapy, a theory question, and for everyone, if all your YouTube videos were erased and everything, and it's your last day on Earth, it's from Leo's House and other podcasts, what would be 3 things you would leave the world? 3 truths, 3 things which are important for you.
3 truths. I think a big one would be learning to be honest. I think honesty is important, and these are not necessarily things that these are things that a lot of times I struggle with, which I think is why I see them as these ideals. And I think, number 2 would be be moving always, like be moving towards something. Don't let yourself stay still. And then the 3rd one, probably like if you feel miserable, that's not a good sign. I think that's a good one.
What to do then? What would be your?
Yeah, I mean, you got to do, if I think maybe go back to the first 2. If you're miserable, be honest with yourself and move towards something, because I think that one comes to mind just because there have been so many times in life where I stayed still, didn't speak up, and I was just miserable, but I just stayed there for way longer than I needed to, because I guess I was more afraid of jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, And I think sometimes, you'll be burning for a long time before you make a movement, and then you finally move on to something else and realize it was better than, way better than I thought. So
sure. Yeah. Sometimes also it's good to know what could be the worst case scenario, right? For people who want to jump, and to also see, okay, what plan could there be for, and probably most of the times no one would die or so. Like,
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So, and if so, then don't do it. But but what's the most case?
If death
scenario?
is a reasonable outcome, then don't do it. Yeah.
All right. Okay. And then one question to that, like honesty, like there is this radical honesty movements, and and you also say like it's a good advice. Like what do you think about radical honesty?
I don't know that I will explain a little bit of what radical honesty is. Is it just what it sounds like always saying what you think? Because is that basically what it is?
Yeah, it's about the line, the 2 polarities. What's socially the norm, and what would people say socially, and what's the radical honesty on the other end of the spectrum?
I think maybe rather than just saying whatever you think is true, maybe the better thing is don't lie. Like don't say anything isn't true.
Yeah.
And it's tough because in social situations, I mean there are variations here, because in social situations, if someone says, "What do you think of my house?" and you think it's ugly, it's probably what is there to gain by saying what is honest, you know?
Sure.
And so I think there are times to sugarcoat things, but I don't know, maybe not. I always put politeness very high up on the list of things, so that would be an issue. Like, how can I maintain honesty and not lying while being polite?
Okay. And then, yeah, very last question. It's about mission and vision. Like, if everything would be possible, you had nothing could go wrong. Like, do you have ideas at the moment? What can people probably expect from you next time? Or like, how would you spend your days?
Yeah, I think you know, I'm trying to keep building on YouTube and build other things outside of YouTube so that if all my videos get deleted, it's not a crushing blow.
No,
So,
won't
yeah,
happen.
yeah. Well, you know, but it's the kind of thing where when you are a YouTuber, you're, you are kind of just under the assumption that YouTube will always be there or will be there for a long time, and you never know. Like, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, I don't anticipate it going away, but you just never know. And so it'd be good to have something else off of it. But I would like to, I think 1 million subscribers plus is doable. So that's what I'm aiming for, trying to get there and, see what I can do, see how I can continue to entertain as well as educate and, maybe add in some more, something that I haven't done before, but I want to do more of is, some mental health advocacy and awareness, because I think there's just not enough of it. And I think especially on YouTube, it can be sensationalized and it can be like just not handled well. So that's something that I would, because all YouTube is all about, you have to get people to click on your video. So you have to have a sensational title like "I'm so depressed," or like "anxiety is ruining my life." But then you have people who like kind of romanticize it. So I think that mental health advocacy and awareness is important.
All right, yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time, for your humor, and yeah, also your humanistic approach, I think. And yeah, thank you.
Well, Maria, thank you for having me. This has been great. A lot of great questions. I really had to think. I was.
All right, then bye.
Bye.
Bye.